About 6 years ago, I was working for a professional rugby club, and it became increasingly obvious that I was getting quite unwell, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I didn't feel right. By the time that contract ended, I was actually so ill. There was no way I was going to be able to find another job. I needed to go to the doctors and say, what's going on? I walked into the doctors and said, look, I've put on all this weight. I don't feel very well. I'm happy for you to tell me I've got a severe case of cake, but I think my thyroid's gone. So a few tests later, and they confirmed that my thyroid was dysfunctioning, whatever, and also that I was desperately low in vitamins and minerals in my body. And I actually was at the point where I felt so ill, I just went to bed. Basically, I was in bed for about 23 hours a day for about 4.5 months. And Mr. J and I were also in the process of trying to find a new place to live. So we were in a rented house that we'd rented together just to see whether we could stand living together or not. And we agreed to live together for 6 months and see how that worked. And 2.5 years later, we thought, well, perhaps we'll buy somewhere together. So during that time of feeling so ill and so awful, we saw this place advertised and we came to see it and completely fell in love with it. And I walked around here using walking sticks to get me around and wondered whether it was something that I could take on, whether actually I was just being mad thinking that I could take on something that was a bit over 3/4 of an acre when I could hardly walk around the house, let alone around the garden. But you know, belief and faith in that you can do things goes an awfully long way. And so we went through the process of buying this, and all the time I was still getting more and more poorly. And probably about 3 weeks before we bought it, I seemed to turn a corner and my health started picking up very slightly. And we started our new life here in a pretty precarious situation of what do we do if I don't get any better than I am now? And I think both of us just believed that, you know, that I having turned that corner and very slightly started getting better, that living here would improve my health exponentially. One of the key things of our relationship is that when we got together, we agreed we would divide everything 50-50. So all our bills are split down the middle, even our food bills. Being that poorly, I knew I wasn't going to be going back to work in the same kind of work that I've done before, which has always been fairly stressful, of peculiar hours, and I knew that I was going to have to be kinder to me. So I said, why don't I commit to producing our food as my equivalent to putting in cash? So rather than having to go out to work and have 2 cars and pay for clothes to work in and all of those things to earn this bit of money to buy food, why don't I grow the food? So Mr. J was really happy about that, and I think we both kind of understood that wasn't going to be an instant fix. I wasn't going to be instantly putting money into our joint account, but that over time that would come. It would come in terms of we would be paying out less on food, and maybe eventually down the line I'd find a way of creating an income from this site as well. I think I had really unrealistic expectations of how much I could achieve. I was thinking of how much I would have achieved before I got ill in any given day, and I just wasn't factoring in that now everything was going to be much slower to develop and for me to be able to do things. So I kind of thought oh, it'll take me a couple of months to create this raised bed garden. But actually, you've got to get from A to B. And the process of building that vegetable garden was much longer, and yet it was better. The fact that it took so long meant that we actually had time to learn much more, that the wind doesn't just come from one direction. There are different times of year that it comes from another direction. So I couldn't just say, well, I'll put a windbreak here, because actually I needed one on that side as well for the few weeks a year that the wind came from that side. And the plan on paper started to unfold, but as that process happened, we were able to build in all the other things that we were learning through observation and through experience. So it's 5 years since I first went out into that field and looked around it, and I now produce all the fruit and veg for our family, apart from the odd thing that we can't grow here. But I'm not just growing for our family. I've now been running a CSA, a community supported agriculture veg box scheme, for the last 2 years. I trialled it last year with an absolutely micro scheme of 7 veg boxes, and this year I'm doing 20 boxes, and that's for a 20-week season. So it's not all year round, but for 20 weeks a year, we're feeding 20 other families too. Working outside in the garden all day long could potentially be a really lonely life, and I am alone a lot of the day, or alone in terms of other human company a lot of the day. But it's far from lonely. I think there's a big distinction between the two, and in terms of being alone, it's quite easy to network. Social media nowadays allows us to do that really easily, but I actually quite like being alone. I quite like being alone with my own thoughts, or just having a bit of music playing on in the background, but actually spending time with myself and having that room to think and to breathe, and not to have a multitude of messages being thrown at me all the time from every which way media, I think is really healthy. And I'm not lonely, in as much as I think loneliness is a different state of mind, and I think being alone is where I want to be a lot of the time. And the cat's always around. There are other living things. So Monty the cat is around, the ducks, the chickens are all around. So I'm aware that there's other living beings around. And then at a much smaller level, there's a constant chatter of birds and insects, and being able to lose myself and lose my thoughts in watching those is such a privilege, and it's such a joy that I don't actually have time to be lonely. I'd never have imagined 5 years ago when we were first looking around here that I would then be writing a book about our experience. And it's less about my experience or Mr. J's experience here than a biography of the field, of the transformation from just a paddock to this living, breathing, food-producing space. And it's been such a short journey, and yet it's been a really exciting one. And there are some days it's felt like it's been a very long journey, but overall that process it's been really interesting, and it's been exciting, and I'm really pleased to have a chance to share just how we've done that, the process I've gone through, the thinking behind it, and I've included lots of why I chose to do one thing rather than another, and I share my mistakes and my successes, and there's just a lot of celebration in it of the changes that have happened to that field that looked like just grass when we moved in, and it had alpacas and a pony on it, and it was a paddock for animals. And to be able to see it now looking so different and having such a hugely different function, it feels like a privilege to be able to share that, and to be able to take you along with me on that journey to where it is now. There's quite a stark contrast between what's happening here and what's happening on the other side of the hedges around us, where we are surrounded by industrial agriculture with the monoculture crops. And I'm very aware of it because I see the farmers out there with their combine harvesters and their sprays and notions and potions doing whatever it is that they need to do, produce massive amounts of food. But it's all one thing, and with it there are all the issues that come with industrialised agriculture. And I wish there were more small producers. I wish just on a local level there were more people producing small amounts of food. 3/4 of an acre is not. It's a large garden, and I'm not going to dismiss that in terms of just being a garden, it's a huge space. But in terms of food production, it's a really small space, and yet the diversity of food that we can produce for the number of families that we can produce it without using artificial chemicals, it's just a huge difference. And I wish there were a lot more smaller producers. Members of our VegBox scheme are also thrilled at knowing exactly where their food came from, and they all say how much nicer it tastes. Now, whether it actually tastes nicer or not, I'm not going to argue that one, but if it's perceived to, and I think there's a lot about knowing where your food came from that then satisfies other needs in your brain about this is good for me, and if you feel like you're doing something that's good for you, you feel better in that cyclical way. So each year I have developed a new area. So I've created an area, and I've got comfortable with the food production in that area, and then moved on to another project the next year. And part of that is because I wanted to complete that area how I imagined it would be. It's nothing like I imagined it would be at the beginning. It's way better, which is lovely. I'm really pleased about that. But there's a part of me that constantly wants to learn and change and develop and see how much I can push the boundaries or not. So that area has been evolving, and I kind of feel like it's complete in terms of its structural development now. And the next set of changes are about how much more efficiently I can use that space. So my next set of expansion to some extent is less about expanding the area and more about concentrating on particular areas and expanding what I'm growing in them. Because I think the time will come when there isn't any room to physically expand, but emotionally, mentally, that's an ongoing journey.